Hoping I'm audible as well as visible. Is this being recorded?
Yes.
Okay, never mind. Harsh going as Prime Minister. POIs, whenever you want, just drop in the chat. Don't interrupt me. Starting at the self count of three, two, and one. I'll do two simple things in my debate. I'll prove to you why China has incentive, why China has the capacity, and why Taiwan can't do shit in that scenario. First, incentive of China. A, there are historical reasons. The creation of Taiwan is like a humiliation to China in itself because the people that they were fighting against escaped and managed death. Or historically, the Taiwan territory has been part of the integrated China or the China that the CCP is propagating right now. Secondly, it's politically very important. It has been an issue that has been proclaimed time and time again as a way to unite the population of the country. So if they fail to build on it, or if they fail to project results on it after a significant period of time, they're likely going to be domestic backlash against the CCP and the Chinese government, and they are necessarily against it in itself. Thirdly, it's a very important trade route. It is in a position of a very important trade route. It sits centrally in the South China Sea. It is responsible for the movement of a significant amount of maritime trade of the world GDP rather than not the South Asian GDP. Fourthly, it is important for China to protect itself from US intervention because Taiwan is the biggest US ally, or the most strategic positioned US ally in the area, and China has expansionist tendencies, and everyone knows that it is important for them to annex that territory to reduce US as a non-threat in the case of future expansion in different areas. Fifthly, it's very economically important because it has some various rare earth materials that are not found in a lot of places, and also it is the largest producer of like microchips, and China wants to of course get into that market, and necessarily needs to develop in that scenario, and they want to develop their AI capacities, and that is essential for them to claim China. Sixthly, it's the very important for political leaders to claim their to reclaim their or to extend their patronage in the party in the CCP in itself. If Xi Jinping is able to manage to annex Taiwan at its very core, this is likely going to increase his stock and is likely going to get more control. And it's the last step. They'll claim that after which they have broken the US hegemony successfully and can claim a hegemonic position in the world, also in their domestic politics in itself. So why China will actually have the capacity? Simple. China is likely to grow in the future in itself. It's the fastest growing economy. It's the most tech heavy economy it has been. There are numerous predictions that are going to say that China is going to become the world's biggest economy after a period of time. Secondly, its military might is also increasing. Military might is also increasing. It has close deals with a lot of Russia and North Korea, and Russia and North Korea for increased military warfare, and its military capacity has been tested in Russia in itself, where an ally of Europe and USA in itself cannot actually fight against the military might of China, or the military might of China that has been provided to Russia by China in itself. And lastly, China has created a lot of proxies in that particular area through Belt and Road Initiative that are going to be Chinese allies at best, and at worst, they are going to be negligible actors that are not going to intervene in the annexation if that takes place. These allies might look like Myanmar, Pakistan, to name a few. More and important and morely, even if like Chinese economy, we all know that China has the capacity to fight off against Taiwan in itself. The only problem that is going to happen is in the caveat that USA intervenes in Taiwan and will prove to you that why USA won't able to do shit after 10 years and in the next 10 years, and why China will actually claim in the capacity. First, militarily. Understand that for any capacity to USA to actually intervene in Taiwan, they necessarily need
POI.
to not right now. They necessarily need to gain access to South China Sea because that is the only way where US ballistic missiles and US Navy can actually enter into mainland China and actually intervene in it any capacity. Why they want to do it in the next 10 years? Understand that China has already been making progress in accessing the area of South China Sea in a great capacity. What it looks like, they are using tactics, and they are forming various relationship with the other claimers in that particular area. That is to say that they have formed various relationship with other claimers like Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, and other countries, and they're not likely to be it's not likely going to be very difficult for them to actually annex South China Sea in the future very easily. They are doing it right now through tactics such as grey dawn tactics, where they don't actually engage militarily with other powers, but they're actually doing
POI.
military warfare that is just below the capacity that actually gets targeted in the international bodies. Secondly, they have created lots of artificial islands that allow them better access to the South China Sea, and they are establishing settlements in various capacities that actually help in the time of military. So they're likely going to cut down the access of USA to the South China Sea, so USA can't actually intervene militarily. The second capacity that US has used is simply working through Quad, the alliance of India, China, Australia, and Japan to actually counter Chinese expansion in that area. And why is that not going to work? It is no military obligation in that scenario, where that is to say they have to necessarily fight against Taiwan or fight against China. In the case of Taiwan, there is no obligation for any country. It's just a mutual group or understanding. Secondly, these countries, Taiwan does not mean as important to these countries, and the US policies right now are not actually so favorable for these countries like India, China, and India, Australia, and Japan, that they actually fight against for just because USA will get mad. And India has border issues with China. Japan has a very codependent economy. Australia is very export heavy from China, and they have various capacities. They're not just going to fight against, or they're going to intervene in Taiwan just because USA says so. Before moving on, I'll take you.
If China has all of these capacities that you mentioned and they have this much interest, why have they not annexed Taiwan already?
Taiwan, because simple, China wants efficiency. China is capable of enough to do it right now. Just a matter of fact, it's going to be economically heavy, and it's going to cost them a bit too much at right now. But the tactics they have been using in the next 10 years, it would be easy enough for them to do it without any having major troubles. That is why they're simply waiting. They're capable enough to do it right now. Just a matter of efficiency. Moving on, why economically it won't be actually like USA can't challenge China economically in that scenario. Simple, because they're likely to go and fight through sanctions. Sanctions are a long-term process. They're not just capable of finishing off a country in a month or two. You can see Russia with sanctions has been still been fighting. Secondly, there is an alternative bloc that has been formed against USA in itself, that is looking like BRICS is being formed, and people are actually targeting the US hegemony and the arbitrary sanctions that US has applied. China has very good allies such as Russia and Iran and North Korea, who actively support China in no matter what. And there is likely going to be pushback from the MNCs and the domestic politics of the USA itself, because war in South Asia has been in Vietnam was actively disregarded by the people, and there were domestic backlash against the government in itself. With that, I'll end my speech. Thank you.
Thanking the speaker for the very fine speech, inviting leader of up. Here.
All right, just confirming that I'm audible enough.
Absolutely and clearly audible.
All right, thank you very much. I'll most likely be taking the POI from closing. And just in case I'm not able to answer your POI, it's most likely because I didn't hear it well. I wouldn't let you repeat the POI, sorry, but I'm sure Bruni would be answering the POI. And that is because I'm at a place that is very noisy right now. I'm so sorry, guys. Okay, so I'm starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. So obviously, from opposition, we don't need to prove that China will never seek reunification with Taiwan. I think that is quite obvious. What we must show is that full annexation within the next 10 years is unlikely, which is a much higher burden, and government simply does not meet it within the debate. I'm going to make 3 points in this speech. First, why China gains more or benefits more from ambiguity or an ambiguous control rather than a full annexation right now. Secondly, why military and political risk make invasion irrational in the short term, which is within this 10 years. But lastly, why the international economic cost push full annexation far beyond this decade. Let's move into the first argument. Most of my responses are going to be incorporated within my speech. The first argument is that China benefits more from an ambiguous power or control over Taiwan rather than a full annexation. Why is this particularly true? So right now, China already enjoys most of the benefits of control over China without paying the cost of sovereignty. What does this look like? Because Taiwan is diplomatically isolated, i.e. the fact that it is excluded from most international institutions, and you have most multinational companies being pressured to list Taiwan as part of China, it means then that Beijing has been able to selectively punish Taiwan's economy as it wants. And we have seen this with respect to things like the bans they placed on agricultural exports like pineapples and fish from Taiwan in that particular regard. But at the same time, China is able to conduct things like military drills that signal their dominance without necessarily an escalation of war. But compare this to the previous years where China did an annexation of annexation of Hong Kong. Once China formally asserted control, what happened was that Hong Kong stopped being a tool of leverage and became China's burden or responsibility in that particular regard. What does this look like? Beijing now had to govern things like protest. It now had to absorb reputational damage, and it had to face capital flight and sanctions in that particular sense. What does that mean then? It means then that a very quick or very fast full annexation is one that creates unnecessary obligations that yields no profit to any authoritarian regime in that particular regard. But on the other hand, ambiguity is something you are able to weaponize and use as a leverage in that particular sense. And we believe that China has learned this particular lesson. Why? Because just like Russia and Ukraine before 2022, we believe that Beijing right now probably prefer a gray zone pressure. What does that look like? Probably economic coercion, political influence, and the intimidation that they are currently indulging in that particular regard. Why is that particularly so? Because this helps them achieve some form of compliance sometimes without necessarily triggering war or global backlash in return. And that is why the rational strategy right now is to extend the status quo and not to end it within the 10 years in that particular regard. What this argument does is to challenge the urgent incentive to do this by the CCP or by China in that particular regard. The second argument then is about the fact that military success is uncertain and failure is catastrophic. And this is how this is going to deal with the opening government case. Because government treats invasion as if it is merely a question of capacity. Nobody doubts the capacity of China. But the thing about authoritarian regimes is that they do not go to war unless they are confident of success. Because failure is existential. We have a recent example. Russia believed that Ukraine would fall in this. Instead, the war dragged on for years, destroyed Russia's economy, could not retreat from. We believe that China has quickly, as they actually thought it's probably, or as it used to in the previous years. But notice, Taiwan is even harder than Ukraine. What does that mean? It means then that the amphibious invasions which are which China probably would have to use to fully annex what do you call it, Taiwan right now. These are actually the most complex military operations that can probably survive or be successful right now. What does that mean? It means then that Taiwan's strategy, obviously, in response to any attempt of China to get a full annexation, will not be to defeat China outright, right? But it will be like they want to delay, they want to disrupt, and they want to survive long enough for international involvement. What does that mean? It means that even 2 or 3 weeks of resistance from Taiwan would trigger things like the US and the allied responses that they have. But two, it will trigger things like the sanctions, and three, a financial panic within China in itself. This actually matters politically. Why? Because a failed or a stalled invasion would shatter the myth of the CCP competence. Two, it would expose their corruption within the PLA itself, and three, it will embolden the internal dissent within the CCP and the China at large in that particular regard. Notice, authoritarian regimes prefer a stalemate rather than a humiliation. That is why China would most likely wait until success is overwhelming. And that threshold has not been reached within this decade. So you cannot really achieve, or they most likely would therefore not attempt any full annexation in the short term. The third and the last argument is that annexation or full annexation triggers economic costs China cannot absorb right now. Why is this particularly so? So even if we give it to government bench that military victory were possible, the problem is that annexation would come at an economic cost that directly would undermine the CCP's legitimacy. Why is that particularly so? Taiwan produces the vast majority of the world's advanced semiconductors, just like PM tells you. What does that also imply? It implies that any conflict immediately disrupts global supply chains and then by extension forces the Western states to align because they all need these semiconductors. Unlike Russia, China is deeply integrated into global trade and finance. It means that it cannot simply absorb sanctions and pivot inward without triggering mass unemployment and elite discontent. What does that what does this imply to this particular debate? Russia could survive sanctions, because it exports raw materials. But notice that China's growth depends on one, export, but two, foreign technology, and three, a stable global market in that particular regard. What that means then is a Taiwan war risk a permanent decoupling and a slower growth and a rising unemployment, all of which threaten the social contrast between CCP and the Chinese public. This is not just theoretical panel. Even after the limited crisis like the COVID lockdowns, we saw protests across China. The regime's priority obviously is stability, not a symbolic conquest in that particular regard. Why does the 10-year prediction fails then? Government proves desire and incentive at best. They prove capability at best. But the prediction requires urgency, and there is none because Xi Jinping faces no term limits right now. He basically controls the party, the military, and the state. So it means then that, like China's gradual expansion within the South China Sea, Beijing most likely prefers a Salamite tactics, i.e., incremental normalization over decades, not a sudden annexation in that particular regard. Time favors China. Taiwan's population ages, economic independence grows, international focus shifts. Waiting is not weakness, it is the strategy that China would most likely be able to use to get a full annexation beyond this decade. Proud to win this final.
Thanking the speaker for the very fine speech, inviting DPM. Here.
Hi, I'm going to take some 10 seconds. Thank you so much. Hello everyone, I'm Aman Thakur, he, him. I'm going to set up my timer and I'll start. Sorry. Starting in three, two, and one. What I get from operations case till now is that there are two major pushes. First, that ambiguity, being unambiguous actually benefits China. And second, uh, China is not confident, so they're not going to do it. I think both these things are untrue, and I'm going to tell you why. First of all, China is being benefited by this unambiguity. I think this is not true. China does not get any benefit of the microprocessors and the microchips that Taiwan sells, especially to its competitors like US and other countries. This is straight up lying if they say that China gets these microprocessors and these microchips. This is untrue. But secondly, we think that Taiwan is actually one of the places where US is able to extend its influence to counter China because of the reasons that Harsh gives you, which is because it is an important trade route which connects South Korea, Japan to other nations in the south, in the southern Asian regions, which is actually a sort of a connecting bridge that acts as a US extension in this area, which counters China. So this unambiguity, if anything, is detrimental to China, especially when they have expansionist tendencies, which they will continue to have even in the future. But secondly, we think that this China is not confident. I think that's heck no. China has been able, as opposition already claims to you, that China performs regular uh, military exercises in these areas, shows that they have the ability but also the capacity to do this, which and these exercises showcases their intent to essentially perform military maneuvers in these areas. This means that they have the ability and they have the sort of confidence to go ahead and do so. Now I'm going to give you five things in my speech, which proves to you why China will do this in the upcoming 10 years and why it is necessary. First of all, the internal metrics or the politics of the China. First of all, I think that Xi Jinping wants to continue to have some sort of legitimacy further down his career because not he has achieved a lot of things in the sense that China is now a legitimate power, a legitimate pole against US. But for him to continue to be the supreme leader of Chinese people, he has to have some sort of new next step to look forward to. And this next step is something that they have to that looks like acquiring Taiwan, which Harsh has already told you. But secondly, know that he's on a clock. He's also uh, he is aging, etc. This means that he has limited amount of time left to do so. If he has to incorporate or forge his legacy into the CCP or into the Chinese mind, he has to go ahead and try to unite Taiwan again. All of these things prove to you that Xi Jinping has an incentive to go ahead and do this in the upcoming 10 years. The second, and why is it more necessary for them to, and why this also answers two things. First of all, why they have not done this f- they have not been doing this in the past years, and why this will now happen in the further coming ages. I think that US economy is actually declining, and there is a number of reasons for this. First of all, we think that US economy has become increasingly dependent on things like AI, etc. This is true because of three reasons. First of all, the 40% of GDP in the past year, which is 2025, has been especially because of the AI echo chamber or AI sort of system. Secondly, we think that AI companies have also driven 80% of the growth in the American stock in the recent year. Thirdly, we think that the AI, without AI, the US economy would lose a major source of investment. This means that if AI investment stops, their growth would necessarily halt. And all of these things prove that US is extremely dependent on AI. Why do we then think that AI is a sort of a bubble which is going to burst in the further few years, and why it's going to be extremely detrimental and the exact thing that China has been waiting for? First of all, we think that the companies that are actually feeding this AI bubble has been circular in nature. They have been feeding into each other. This means that OpenAI builds the AI chatbot or AI shit. It is being used by companies like Microsoft and other companies. Microsoft asks Nvidia to make chips or make data centers, which is then used by OpenAI to train their
QI.
AI chatbots on their AI working models on. All this proves that it is a circular thing, which is that no one is actually there is no external influence into it. It is a circular thing which is feeding into each other. But secondly, we think that the biggest corporation like OpenAI has not yet been profitable, which means that even after years of extreme amount of investment into OpenAI, it has not been able to generate considerable amount of profits for its stakeholders. Thirdly, we think that it is also that it all of this has been because of just a big speculation, which means that the stimulus that has been coming to to AI has been because of private investors like Microsoft pumping money into this. For this whole echo chamber to become profitable, they will eventually have to shift onto something else. The major thing that they're doing right now is generative AI, which generates answers, generates videos, etc. This is not profitable because people don't pay for this. They are not even trying to make this profitable. What they'll have to do is they have to switch onto something else if they need profit, which everyone needs to work and function. When this will happen, it is going to be extremely problematic because when they shift, people will stop having faith in this because now the sort of things that they're going to, yeah, POI from opening first. Three, two, one. It's predicted
Yeah,
time, by the
you
way.
seem to be focusing
It's
on one
predicted time. I'm very, really
stakeholder.
sorry. So when these for them to generate some profit, they'll have to switch to things like military AI, which a normal person cannot see. This means that their interest into investing into these sort of things will decrease further down. If this decrease, there is going to be a sort of a crash which is eventually going to happen because people will stop having faith in this. All this proves that if this AI bubble bursts in the future, the market will crash because it's extremely dependent on this. Layoffs will happen, there will be economic collapse. this is bad because you can't fight a war without your economy being strong. Because first of all, you will not have any investment, not private, not public. First of all, your government is in a huge debt. US is running on a huge debt. If they are not able to generate profit in the next couple of years, they're going to be in a huge shitload of problem. But thirdly, people don't want you to fight because you're in an economic downturn. If you go ahead and fight China during this downturn, you're going to be people will be people will not want this, and this is going to be protests and all those sort of things. So this is extremely difficult for them to fight a war in this sense. All this proves that when this bubble bursts, China will go ahead and annex Taiwan. This is going to happen in the further few years. China is also, yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thanking the speaker for the very fine speech, inviting the yellow. Here.
Yeah, am I audible?
Absolutely and clearly audible.
All right, sure. My name is Kwesi, but I'm DLO for today. If you have a POI for me, you kindly unmute and you ask your POI. Yeah, sure. Just a second. In 3, 2, 1, go. Let's concede with opening government that the United States of America is actually winning the AI race. We are still going to show you why. And the United States of what was it called? Sorry, what's the time? What's the time?
Paused.
I'm coming. Yeah, sorry. All right. Am I audible? I just wanted to go reduce the music from the hall because it's really
Yeah,
distracting of thought.
you're clearly audible. If you want to restart, you can. It's just been 20 seconds.
All right, sure. All right, sure. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. Let's agree that the United States of America is literally losing the AI war to the Chinese government or to China. Our case or the extension is going to show you why there are more actors that one are involved in AI production and have adopted what was it called AI and technology that will still aid China, that will still aid Taiwan in the bid to protect themselves, and they are going to make the what was it called the whole war annexation elapse the space of 10 years. This is what we are going to actually do as the extension from the opening opposition. Let's get into these things. So the very first thing that you need to understand is that across the Asian peninsula in of itself, the nations and states that have always emancipated are ones that are known to be aggressors. So notice that their aggression from their aggression within this peninsula has actually wired states and nations to always be on the brink of our to sit unconscious what's it called awareness that they could be attacked or they need to actually collaborate with each other to protect their own interests as states. So notice how right from the Mongolia Empire through the Japanese Empire and the regime and the annexation that happened within the Asian peninsula in of itself led to the things and led to China collaborating with the Mongolian nation and other like what's it called states to be able to secure peace within that specific regime in of itself. So notice that any sort of annexation action that is triggered within the peninsula start creating that sort of fear and that that sort of responsibility for states to want to actually protect themselves. What is the tipping point of this specific context? Notice that they say that when the annexation goes on, what happens is that no other state around the region is going to have a responsibility to want to actually aid Taiwan. That means that the annexation is going to be successful and the prediction is actually correct. Notice that the very context that I actually gave you shows you that nations like Japan, who are actually ranked just behind China when it comes to AI, are going to also be come in alliance and agreement with USA. Why is this specific thing true? This is true because Japan has an incentive to want to protect themselves against the next action that China might want to actually take within the peninsula. Given that this specific responsibility of survival actually exists for Japan, it means that you now have two crucial stakeholders with two crucial stakeholders, but with exponential resources that is going to clamp down on China. This specific phenomena is what is actually going to deter China from actually wanting to do this thing. It is true. China might have the incentive to want to actually annex, but the reason why they've not done it and the reason why they are still not going to do it within the space of 10 years is what we are still going to touch on. Notice that the way in which you actually take a move of annexation or conquest of a specific state or a neighboring state looks like you being very sure that there is you being very sure that there is so much capacity on your side, and you can actually win that specific that specific war within that particular purview. Given that the uncertainty case that you actually get from from ELO, you actually back it with a lot of analysis. I don't have to actually touch it. Actually exists within this specific point in time. It means that China is not going to actually want to take this specific action. Notice that we actually add another stakeholder that is going to join forces with Taiwan, and is actually going to join forces with Taiwan themselves and the United States of America to actually want to protect Taiwan within that specific purview. It means that the exponential increase of stakeholders that are willingly ready to actually protect Taiwan far outweighs China, and hence we don't think this is actually a reasonable thing that any nation that actually holds power want to actually take. I'll take a POI now.
Taiwan, Japan, South Korea collectively do not have enough military personnel compared to Chinese military personnel. How will they beat China in a war?
So here's the thing, and you are actually losing the debate. So if you want to talk about military personnel, so notice that if China is actually USA actually holds a huge asymmetry when it comes to military, ammunition and security, blah 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 blah. If even China actually equals their power, the additional nations like Japan, Korea, all those specific people who still want to protect themselves far now outweighs what exists on the side of China. It means that it becomes a very preposterous action that you really want to actually take within that instance. You won't actually do this specific thing. Let me take closing.
How do you reconcile this with the increasing American isolationism in the 21st century?
No, American isolation, like how you need to come and actually prove it, like within this specific debate. We all know how America is actually trying to reach wider and actually have more better, soft power over nations, because they're actually losing it to China. And so they have actually rerouted the way in which they actually have their diplomatic ties with nations or states and with peninsulas like Africa and all those specific things. They now come as mutual allies and see Africans as equals and all those specific things because of how Chinese have actually engaged their Chinese have actually entered these diplomatic meetings and all these specific things. So America is actually doing well when it comes to those particular things. But I notice that the capacity doesn't exist on their side, because I prove how there is more exponential capacity that exists on our side of the house that tone down the capacity that exists. It means that you cannot base on that capacity that they state on their side to really want to say that the prediction is going to be true on their side. But then the second thing, because I already proved how incentive doesn't actually work, capacity doesn't work. But then the last thing, even if they say Xi Jinping is actually irrational, we don't think Xi Jinping is actually the only individual that controls China within controls China. Why? Because the CCP from my partner's analysis already shows you how they have massive control over Xi Jinping himself, and he will do what they want and not do what he wants. Here.
Thanking the speaker for the very fine speech. Also, just requesting speakers to just wait like 10 seconds. My Zoom is glitching. I cannot open chat space or anything. I'll just rejoin. Ronnie, mute. I don't think you realize you're unmuted. Yeah, I'll join in. Just
Sorry for the background noise. I'm just getting myself situated. Um, I will be starting in 3, 2, 1. Okay, what we believe has happened is that the opening half is like kind of like lost track of the motion. Like they've kind of like undermined this kind of idea that like what we are tracking is what will change in the next 10 years and what has changed as of late, but makes this now possible, and not only possible, ever the more likely to happen. Okay, let's start with some characterization. Let's like look at like the ideas of China and like what they want and how this changes over the next 10 years. So they want political dominance, like that's kind of like very low burden claim to reach. Like as a nation, they want to be able to have power to enable them to like maintain resources, maintain economic prevalence, maintain the general state of living for the people within their nation. So I feel like it's a general low burden claim to say that they want economic political dominance, and they also want economic dominance to be able to do the same things. Like these things are both required in order to have a healthy nation and to have a nation that is able to survive. Okay, but what we believe has like been kind of unaddressed is this kind of like changing state of Western powers. So what's happening is the idea is that the West is slowly degrading. Like we are having this idea that different nations are slowly moving towards like different perspective. The countries are being split. You are having a rise in the far right and far you are having this like kind of schism within different nations where people are being pushed either to the far right or the far left, and nations aren't really able to like be able to lead themselves or be representatives of their people in like very satisfying ways to most individuals within that nations. We're seeing that in nations like the US, a nation that's become practically incontinent. Like it's just been leaking poop everywhere, like into the world, and like this kind of idea that they are unable to kind of direct themselves and have a clear presence in what they're able to do. It's this change and this further degradation within the Western world that gives China not only the leeway, but furthermore the grounds to undergo the annexation of Taiwan. Okay, we're now going to do further analysis on what is changing to further grow this incentive for the annexation of Taiwan. The kind of ideas of like Taiwan's Taiwan's uh, economic power and like industrial power being symmetrical are a case for the opening half. But what we're saying is that technology has changed, and Taiwan has unique abilities under the current technological scheme that they're able to provide outsized benefits that can't be found in any other nation. We see our opening talking a bit about chip manufacturing, but their lack of depth and a lack of analysis on how very important this is to the like future of the entire world is basically why we're going to continue with it. So What is chip manufacturing? Okay, we see Taiwan as one of the main manufacturers of high level, high grade chips. These are the chips required to undergo any new modernized technology. It's the chips required to make these things like GPUs. It's the chips required to make these highly advanced CPUs. But literally the technology that push the entire world forward. They're the steps that we need to take. They're the steps that are used to take, the building blocks that are used to make these new technologies, to host these large AI chatbots that are seemingly becoming more and more prevalent and more important to the continued world order. Nations are now investing billions upon billions into their own industries, billions upon billions into their own tech industries to remain on top, to remain dominant. And as this focusing on tech continues, as it's focusing on what advancements we can make continues, Taiwan becomes all the more relevant, all the more important to the idea of like global world order, and all the more important to China as a source of this technology, as a source of information. They currently already have this idea of like trying to already have this idea that they have this idea of claiming Taiwan. They already know that it's important. They already want it to a large degree. When it becomes to a point where there's the West is degrading and no longer connected enough or united enough to strategize against China, that's when we get this idea that China has not a very clear method, a very clear ability to just take over the nation. Okay, why do we see Taiwan as not really having this power within themselves to begin with? Okay, we see this in this idea that like Taiwan is currently defended by its Western alliances. Like the only thing that is stopping China um like for continuing their full claim over Taiwan is this idea that these Western powers are like allied together to prevent China from doing this. Like these Western powers are working
You're
together to get people to back off. Sure, I'll take it.
Yeah, that's problematic because China's main goal is to become a global superpower. They want to topple the US and everyone. Why would they trade that
We
off in
what
exchange?
we are saying what we are saying is that their main method of becoming a global superpower, their clearest goal of becoming a superpower, their road for enforcing their power, for enforcing their economic dominance, is through the control of Taiwan, is through the annexation of Taiwan, and it only happens under this mechanism and it's the main mechanism under which they can gain this dominance through technology, which is the most prevalent thing within the advancement of society right now. We're saying that technology is most important in weighing, as it's the clearest thing that gives us advancement. It's the clearest thing that gives us physical change within nations. It's the clearest thing that changes the lives of people's nations from a day to day. And Taiwan has an outsized ability to provide this information, to provide this technology, and China would most definitely be able to take advantage of this, would most definitely desire to take advantage of this to be able to bolster their idea as an international power. Okay, we were talking about the inability of Taiwan to defend itself. It's currently like very clear because like their militaristic power is pales in comparison to the idea to that of China, and like Taiwan to some degree would wants to exist. Like their people want to live, their people want to survive. So it's not going to resort to a total war against China when it hasn't got this stalemate of allies working together and forcing China to back off. So what we see now is a world where the Western countries aren't united. China is incentivized to take Taiwan for this advancement, for this support of people, and that's when we see this clear need and this clear possible, very probable future where Taiwan is annexed. Thank you very much.
Thanking the speaker for the very fine speech, inviting member of OP here.
Yeah, member of OP here. Sorry, I've used another device. My name is Anene Bubeshku, also known as him. Please confirm that I'm audible, first of all.
Clearly audible.
Yeah, so I'd like to dedicate this speech to my Lord and personal Savior, Jesus Christ. I'd also like to tell debaters as well that it's still cool to serve Jesus even in this time and age. Yeah, so I'll be beginning very shortly. If you have a POI, you can just, for some reason, I can't open the chat space. I don't know why. So just unmute say POI once, POI OG or POI CG. Just say that, this bar. Let me enter, let me go a little bit away from there. Okay, yeah, so if you have a POI, just say POI OG or POI CG, and I'll note the fact that you have a POI, and I'll probably take one. In the event that I don't take any, my partner will take some. Okay, then I'm going to be beginning in, sorry, just wait. I need this food to be, I need this food to be very sweet. Okay, cool. I'm going to be beginning in 3, 2, and 1. So we've had a very beautiful debate so far, if I'm being very honest. However, there have been slight deficiencies that exist so far that we are necessarily going to be solving from closing opposition on our way to easily winning today's debate. Yes, easily. The problem with our opening is this. They agree with opening government's frame around the whole idea of how China is expansionist in nature and all of the other yada yada that opening government tells you about China. The only pushback that we get from opening opposition is to say, oh, Taiwan necessarily have like lots of external defenses that will come from other countries in themselves. Hence, it means that there will be a huge risk for these individuals to necessarily carry out this action. The problem with that is that it does not necessarily guarantee that the prediction from opening government and closing government by extension will not necessarily manifest, especially since they, by not necessarily engaging with that, they agree with the idea that China is expansionist in nature without necessarily showing us how they are able to fulfill that nature that China necessarily have. So the comparative that exists in opening opposition's world is either the world where China invades Taiwan or a world where China remains on their own. If you weigh both sides on both scales, you most likely not like necessarily be able to like be fully convinced that China will just remain on its own, especially given that concession that they make by not engaging with that particular idea. Basically the same thing that you necessarily get from closing government. What we do is that we still agree with the idea that China is inherently expansionist and co in nature. We, however, do not think that that expansion in itself, in terms of annexation, is something that will be carried towards Taiwan. We agree that they are going to do annexation. We rather think that those annexation efforts are necessarily going to be targeted. We predict rather that they are going to be targeted instead at like other like locations as opposed to that particular location. Please pause my time, I'm coming. Yeah, please, how many minutes do I have left? I thought I had an emergency patient because I heard knocks on the door.
What did you ask? If you can repeat again?
Yeah, I said I thought I had an emergency patient because I heard knocks, and I was asking how many minutes I have left.
You're exactly at 1 minute 57 seconds. That being said, you probably have around um 5 minute 13 seconds left. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Continuing then in 3, 2, and 1. So what we necessarily believe is that China's focus will be on more easily annexable territories.
Point of information.
Wow. Okay, shoot, be quick.
Do you see China as expanding towards the moon in the next 10 years?
Please sit down. So while Taiwan is geopolitically critical, it is uniquely costly to annex, as this has already been established, due to its defensive capabilities, international backing, and economic significance. Therefore, over the next decade, China is more likely to focus on smaller, less defended or politically fragmented regions, territories where annexation can succeed with minimal global backlash. Examples include, number one, you have the South China Sea Islands. Note, Taiwan is in East China. The South China East Islands and reefs, many of which are disputed with Southeast Asian states. China has already built military and civilian infrastructure on several features and can consolidate sovereignty over uninhabited or sparsely inhabited islands with limited risk of direct confrontation. Annexation here carries low military and economic costs, no large population to govern, and minimal threats of large-scale international intervention. But two, you also have border regions in Tibet or Inner Mongolia where China can adjust administrative control or extract concessions from local actors without necessarily triggering a global response. Someone is unmuted. What is happening now? It's not fair.
Bishop.
I have paused your timer. Just a sec. Who is unmuted? Genesis, you're unmuted.
Of this now.
Genesis.
Oh, sorry.
Oh God, you're
Okay.
unmuted. Okay.
That's
I've
slow now.
paused your timer. No worries. It's 3
Where
minutes
where
15 seconds exactly.
what was the last thing I talked about?
You were just giving the analysis that South China Sea is already on a general control of China and how it actually plays within the debate. You can continue from that.
So
You were audible though.
the second example then is border regions in Tibet or Inner Mongolia, where China can adjust administrative control or extract concessions from local actors without triggering a global response. Incremental consolidation here strengthens domestic control and legitimizes the CCP internally. The impact is that by targeting smaller, lower risk areas, China can achieve annexation wins without necessarily provoking these catastrophic consequences that Taiwan will guarantee. This makes Taiwan strategically valuable as leverage and not as target or conquest, reinforcing our central argument that China benefits more from keeping Taiwan unannexed, while they necessarily gain territorial and strategic gains elsewhere. But then why are these other alternate regions for annexation more preferable for China than Taiwan, and why does that affect their ability to inherently annex Taiwan in and of itself? Notice that already by simply telling you how China has already begun to increase their military influence within these particular areas, we supersede them, because when we're talking about predict, we're not talking about prophesy. It means you have to point to things on the ground that are necessarily pointing towards that. And one of the first key signs of where annexation usually takes place, if you look at things like the annexation of Hong Kong, is that you see an increase in military presence around that particular area. Such increase is not something that you have within the region of Taiwan, it's something that you have within the regions of these South China Seas I talked about. But notice the reason why this is more true, because China's focus on smaller, less defended or politically fragmented territories is preferable to Taiwan for several interlocking reasons, and this directly reduces the likelihood of Taiwan annexation in the near term. The first is you have lower military and political costs, because unlike Taiwan, which is heavily urbanized, mountainous, and has a strong, well-trained military, these alternative territories, such as South China Sea islands or sparsely populated border areas, require minimal troop deployments, little logistical support, and almost no protracted governance. Annexing Taiwan would require a massive amphibious invasion, sustained occupation, and counter-insurgency efforts against a hostile, highly educated population. Smaller territories offer high territorial gain for low risk, making them far more attractive in a constrained time frame. But two, minimal international backlash, in the sense of the fact that Taiwan's annexation would trigger a global crisis. Things like immediate sanctions, possible military intervention from the United States, Japan, and NATO allies, and long-term isolation from global trade networks. In contrast, annexing remote islands or peripheral border regions creates localized disputes rather than a coordinated global response. The cost-benefit ratio for China is far better in these low-risk areas because the international community is less likely to retaliate militarily or economically. But thirdly, it's immediate and tangible gains. Smaller annexation provides direct, easily realized benefits. These are things like control over strategic maritime features, resource rights, or domestic political consolidation without the enormous cost that Taiwan annexation entails. By achieving quick wins elsewhere, China is able to strengthen its regional position and domestic legitimacy without necessarily committing to a high-stake war. Notice why this reduces the likelihood of annexing Taiwan. One, because China can achieve gains more safely, quickly, and cheaply elsewhere. But two, is that in a world where they necessarily do that, Taiwan becomes strategically less urgent. But three, is because of the fact that when you annex a particular region, you have to, like most times, wait like a long period of time, as we've seen over time, so that you are not necessarily branded as a more or overly aggressive actor. It's why we waited like over 20 years or 30 years after the annexation of Hong Kong before we now even begin to talk about anything like another annexation in itself. But the next benefit or the next reason why they are most likely going to prioritize these areas is because with these regions, they allow China necessarily to generate leverage over multiple states at once, as opposed to just a single state. Because already, OG already tells you how this state does not necessarily matter to many people. We believe that the South China Sea matters more to people that are more proximate to China, hence posing more of a threat to them, as opposed to US that is far away. It generates leverage over multiple states at once. For example, controlling key islands in the South China Sea pressures Asian countries, such pressures Japan and even the US to negotiate, invest in defense commitments or acquiesce to Chinese claims. This multiplies the strategic value far beyond what Taiwan alone offers. In contrast, Taiwan's unresolved status is primarily a bilateral issue between China and the US, with indirect pressure on others. But annexation would unify those same powers against China if they necessarily focus on these particular things. So basically, what we've necessarily been able to establish to you is that considering everything, that you can basically agree with everything OG tells you, and it still favors our side. In terms of how China is expansionist in nature, they are more likely to expand here. In terms of how Xi Jinping would want to create a legacy for themselves, they are less likely to want to take a risk, is less likely to want to take a risk for something that has a high propensity of failure, and more likely to take an accession to a side that has a high
Time.
propensity of success. fact that the benefits that could necessarily come from this far outweigh what you can get from Taiwan. CG, I don't understand how.
Thanking the speaker for the very fine speech, inviting Gavit here.
Hiya. Can you guys see slash hear me?
Cool. We can both see
Yep.
you and hear
All
you.
good? Amazing. Thank you very much. Okay, great. Yeah, I'll take POIs vocally as well. And I will start my time in 3, 2, 1. A member of opposition provides a very interesting case that agrees on sort of the terms of China's expansionism, but seems to take expansionism for expansionism's sake, which we categorically disagree with. China is not going to just expand wherever it wants because that's the thing to do. Like, this is not the kind of 17th, 18th century where you expand for the sake of prestige or whatever. Like, go and take some random island somewhere for no particular reason. So the key difference between sort of Taiwan and the South China Sea Islands. I mean, South China Sea Islands, yeah, as characterized by a member of opposition, they are sparsely populated. There's nothing going on there. There's, in terms of industry, or there's no sort of benefits. I mean, what you get, like a little bit of fishing, which in China's long coastline doesn't necessarily need that anyway. Whereas my partner has already previously characterized the most important part of this debate being technology and the technological advances, technological benefits that having Taiwan as a territory provides China. And so that analysis was provided previously on the importance of this sort of microchip, particularly in the next 10 years, particularly in the changing face of technology globally and how that's integrated into the sort of wider economic system. That is why Taiwan is the most important sort of area within the South China Sea for China to be looking at. Not look at Taiwan, it's an island that is in the South China Sea. Oh my God, let's go and annex it because we just want to annex anything. That seems to be a sort of mischaracterization of China's expansionist policy from CO. We'd also like to note that everyone in the debate so far seems to conflate the annexation with Hong Kong and seems to misunderstand Hong Kong and the situation in Hong Kong as an annexation, where we'd like to point out that it was slightly different in terms of that it was a handover by the British Empire to China. And so what happened there in terms of the handover, it was a peaceful handover. It was not anything necessarily to do with military power or military intimidation, but really was an agreement between the two and was more to do with decolonization in the 20th century. And therefore, these kind of comparisons drawn between what would happen in the next 10 years with Taiwan and what had happened currently in what had happened in Hong Kong and what will happen with Taiwan in the next 10 years are a false equivalence. And so we categorically reject that based on historical precedent and what happened there. So yes, as my partner explained, the 2 points that were most important here within this debate, and the 2 points that make closing government sort of the strongest case, are the fact of the world order is changing, the Western alliance is destabilized, which then builds upon the idea of capacity and builds upon the sort of external factors which allow China to annex Taiwan with little sort of fear of repercussion. And so my partner commented on the idea of the fragmenting of the Western alliance. When you have to look no further than Europe, Trump and Vance's speeches in the past year calling Europe a decaying civilization, and when asked directly, saying, I don't know whether the Europe is somewhere that I'm interested in keeping in alliance with. I mean, that sets a key precedent. I'll take it in a minute. That sets a key precedent that the US has no qualms with sort of attacking, undermining, degrading its allies if it so sort of benefits them politically. I'll take your POI now.
Yeah, so South China Sea enemies are much more closer and proximate and can hurt China. Unlike Taiwan, who is inside mainland China, they can contain any particular enemy harm from Taiwan, unlike South China Sea.
Sorry, was there a question in there?
Yeah, so I'm telling you, they are high likely going to be more predictive on our side. So they'll try to protect the expansion in South China Sea in the next 10 years, instead of focusing on a little Taiwan inside mainland China that can be controlled in case of any attacks.
We definitely agree that. So we agree that that Taiwan certainly is geostrategically important within the South China Sea. We definitely agree on that, and for that reason, we definitely agree that China would be interested. We see that the US might have an interest in that region, but similarly, the US has interests all over the world. The US has interests in Europe, particularly kind of in Eastern Europe, right, with defending like the eastern frontier of Western liberal democracy, and yet is willing to compromise that for for its more internal isolationist policy, focusing more on on its country. So, in which case, we believe that we've proved to you that the kind of the world order as it stands is definitely heading in a position of isolationism, heading in a position of parasitic foreign policy, where it's being legitimized for countries to behave more aggressively to take. I mean, look at Donetsk, for example, right? That region of the U.S. in U.S. of Ukraine in U.S. peace agreements proposals. What you have is Russia maintaining keeping that land, right? So what's to say that that cannot be then extrapolated to the idea of if China was to be particularly aggressive in South China Sea, annex Taiwan, having a peace proposal agreement that would allow China to maintain it, or at least allow some kind of retained control. So, in which case, that shows that the kind of world order as it stands is definitely heading in the direction of more aggressive behavior, more expansionist behavior on all sides, from all superpowers. And then, secondly, this key point from my partner on technology being crucial, and this is the key. This is what CO fails to understand: is that technology, it's not, again, we're not expanding for the sake of expanding. We're expanding because we want to expand our technology capability. We want to fight this new arms race, the new age arms race in technology, in AI, and whether it be generative AI or or moving closer to robotics and fusing the two. The key sort of important part of changing everyone's life, of changing the kind of the global order, comes through this technological arms race, and this technological arms race is based widely in countries like Taiwan. And so being able to annex Taiwan, having then a competitor to South Korea or to Japan or other regions where the microchip and other technology is advancing, or even Silicon Valley, would be crucial for China. And we see this as their most combining the two, combining this expansionist policy that everyone in the debate seems to agree on, and we've also given the mechanism or why the kind of external factors as to why this would be possible, means that China is then more likely within the next 10 years essentially to do this. And also the fact that we have provided the global context on this, the reason for why the US would be less likely to intervene, I think takes us kind of another level over kind of opening government who focuses more on the economic factors rather than political state of the world. Thank you. I've never been prouder to propose.
Thanking the speaker for the very fine speech, inviting off Flip here.
Okay, am I audible?
Absolutely and clearly audible.
Okay. I'll be taking POIs from all op teams, and I don't know, but I'll pause along my speech and take POIs. But just in case, but I'll do take the POIs. But just in case you think I'm not really considering, you just unmute and say POI. And that's just that, right? Okay. So I think the first way up you must do between closing opposition and all government teams, both OG and CGA, is simple. Note how CO does not question the capacity of China to do any of the things that OG and
Is it just me or is he not audible?
No, I think it's cut. Yeah, not for me either. I can't hear him.
You can't hear me?
Yeah, you just got cut off, so it's better if you can restart your speech.
Okay, let me position myself. How about this? Is this better now?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. Sorry about that.
Can I just read out the motion for a quick audibility check?
Can I restart that? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, you can
I
restart.
should read the motion.
Yep.
Okay. Let me see if I can find the motion. This okay, this house predicts Taiwan will be fully annexed by China within 10 years.
Okay, you are almost clearly audible, so you can restart.
Okay, lovely. Sorry about that. Okay. So Siu, comparing this is the first way up you must do between Siu and OG and CG in this debate. First thing, Siu does not disclaim the capacity of China to annex China, even when they want to. What Siu disputes is a counter prediction, like trying to tell you that China is less likely going to take any part that will give it full annexation of Taiwan. What that simply means is that in the next 10 years, from 2025 onwards, China has already spent billions of dollars trying to invest in protecting, for example, the South China Sea, which has one of the largest global oil deposits, largest amounts of marine resources and stuff like that. But secondly, the South China Sea is one of the greatest marine passage for global trade and activities and military stuff, right? And thirdly, note that China views this particular resource as one where if it is able to protect it, it can fend itself off from external enemies. Note how it makes more sense for China to do that, unlike Taiwan, who is currently not showing any sense of threat against China. Taiwan has never had any official track record of trying to attack China. But secondly, Taiwan is found inside mainland China, right? They are surrounded by us. There's less likelihood they want to attack it because there's huge level of mutual deterrence. But secondly, when you attack us, you give people a good reason to not even support you in the first place. So China is highly likely going to play within this particular ball game. But secondly, the second way up is simple. Because China will have to withdraw resources externally to focus on Taiwan, even though they can annex them, we think it can affect all of the expansions they have made economically, all of the expansions they have made geopolitically, and stuff like that. This can happen in four folds. Note that just because a country is small, it doesn't mean if you are a global military might, miraculously, when you start the war and you finish, the cost is not going to be so impactful. You can use Russia and Ukraine as an example. People thought it was going to be a walkover, right? Yes, they went into Ukraine, they did some annexations, they had their wins, but they are struggling now economically. And that's why they fall below. They don't even count when it comes to global top 10 economies. That is what's likely going to happen to China because for every military weapon that you are going to use, that costs $200 million, $300 million, you are going to use several weeks and months to actually reproduce them. But secondly, you are actually going to lose more and more military personnel because they have to die in the war for you to have that complete annexation. But thirdly, it means you must keep on reinvesting resources just to contain and take over just Taiwan. That alone means that you can run into massive levels of debt as China, right? If you run into massive level of debt, it means you have to withdraw people from your India China dispute borders. Secondly, you have to redirect resources from the South China Sea to Taiwan. Why? Because of four important things that member position tells you. He tells you that geographically, Taiwan is a high risk target, right? Because the distance between Taiwan and China is about a wild, almost 100-kilometer distance between China and Taiwan. And that distance is full of water. When you are coming, they're going to see you. And no, Taiwan already have military bases. They have U.S. armies. U.S. already has sold so much weapons to them. By the time you get into Taiwan, they might have killed thousands of your soldiers, destroyed millions of your weapons and stuff like that. But secondly, remember what she tells you that when you even get into Taiwan, it is so mountainous. Listen, the fish knows the water better than the fisherman, even if he's able to catch the fish, right? Taiwanese people and their military, they are not idiots. They have already dug land mines. They already know their own terrains much more better. So yes, you might be able to get in there, but the cost is so big. That's how come you're going to re-diversify all these particular resources towards Taiwan, and therefore you end up losing all of those particular gains. As a reasonable Chinese person or Chinese government, do you think as judges, predictively, they're highly likely going to really give up everything just in exchange to just get Taiwan, we think that is less likely. And that is a counter prediction from side close opposition. That's how come we win this debate on 4 other different metrics, right? Before that, I'll take a PY from closing government if they have any. Closing government. Okay, opening government.
If
Good. No engagement.
the
Yeah, OG.
if US does not have the economic prowess to fight this war, which is the mechanism that US's air bubble will burst, how will they be able to help other nations to fight against China? For example, support Taiwan.
Come on, Taiwan already have a Taiwanese Relations Act with the US. It's a law passed. It's binding on US, and US is mandated to intervene and fight for them. So even if you fully annex, the US is mandated by law, according to US laws, to do so. They can trigger that clause and there could be impacts on you. But secondly, you have a base. You owe an obligation to your citizens who are military people in Taiwan. You think US is going to sit aloof and just watch China because they're the world's military might, etc. They're likely going to coagulate NATO and their allies and forcefully go and make sure they can extract them or probably help Taiwan to regain back that. So yes, you could predict that your prediction may be true that they could regain back it. Our counter prediction is even if you take it fully, there's going to be good reasons for them to take that particular spot back, and the cost is so massive, right? But even if you don't buy that, listen, the instant proximate gains that the member opposition tells you are things that we think China is likely going to buy into. Why don't you annex South China Sea? And there's evidence for the past 10 years that China has been annexing South China Sea. The only thing you hear from US is a backlash. It's just verbal threat, stuff like that. You never see them engaging militarily, which means the backlash is so small and better and more logical to follow. But secondly, China doesn't need to withdraw all its resources from all other areas in order to refocus on Taiwan and stuff like that. Because note, wars are highly, highly expensive. No matter how small the target is, not as much as a target as much as Taiwan. We think Taiwan can be able to, even if they can do the full annexation, the kind of what should I say, counter force that Taiwan can give them is one that can really make whatever claims we are saying persuade China to not want to follow that particular route, right? But lastly, why must we ways above our opening? Because it is only our side that we are able to confidently predict and convince you that China is likely going to pursue expansions elsewhere and not Taiwan. But secondly, it's only aside that you get a cost efficient analysis that persuades China to want to not consider Taiwan as like one of the biggest targets and that it must refocus all its resources in order to take Taiwan down. If you all understand how wars work, and look at that, wars always comes with huge casualties. And secondly, they are always very, very expensive. But thirdly, they always lead to amassment of so much debt and stuff like that. Then it means China will not be a stupid guy, going to be a sensible guy like close negotiation. They are probably going to follow our route. Prioritize who gives China an ability to still maintain its dominance within global space, but secondly, not lose out that particular expansionist ideology. This aligns with their interest, and this is what the predictive behavior is going to look like.
Thanking the speaker for the very fine speech. Now, this marks the end of this debate. For the final call, I think will be provided in the closing ceremony. So, best of luck, guys, for the closing ceremony. I'll just invite all the judges to join the judge deliberation channel of Room 1 on Discord.